Are we just gonna wait to see how long it takes for one of us to talk?
I like the stalemate. I like the face off before one of us breaks.
Quite a staring contest we were in there.
Yeah, we actually start on time today, which is rare for those people who actually listen live. Us starting on time is a rarity. If you are a podcast person, then it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, it starts on time for you every time. Actually, what it probably does is come out a day later, if we're being honest. But
yeah, I still don't understand people. Like, I'm not trying to. If you're listening live or watching live, like, please stick around. But me personally, I don't understand the concept of just watching people do a live podcast. I get that it's very popular.
Yeah,
I don't personally do it.
Well, so here's what I would suggest. And I've been oh shit, did my audio just change a bunch?
Yeah, you went through puberty, kind of.
Jesus Christ, what happened there? Oh, I see what's going on. My God, there's an app that I've got. Anyways, so the way that I envision the live podcast, which you and I have talked about a fair amount, is like kind of like in the place of live radio. And the way that you can do this without having to actually watch the podcast, and this is how I consume content on YouTube, by the way, is get YouTube Premium, and then you can have your app closed or your phone off. You don't have to have the app sitting there open watching the entire time. And to me, it seems insane to sit there and watch a YouTube video of two people talking. I fully agree with you. But I'll put it on. I'll be like mowing. I'll listen to it the way that I used to consume sports radio, which is in the background of my life, as opposed to like in the absolute foreground. I must be paying full attention to these two men talking.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole idea of podcasts. It's just like background noise now. And that's why for me, it's like maybe our voices are very abrasive. I have no idea. We haven't received that feedback yet. But every now and then I'll be listening to a podcast, or my wife will be listening to a podcast, and the person on the other end during the talking just has an abrasive voice. It's like they might be delivering great content, really good information, but because of the way we consume audio now, it's like if your voice really sucks, it's tough, man. It's like tough because like half the time you're not even paying attention to the information that's being delivered to you. It's just there to kind of keep the noise is there to keep you company more than anything else. And you want it to be soothing and easy to listen to.
Yeah, I don't think either of us have voices that are particularly good or bad. That's what I would say. Is I think we're both fine. What you're welcome to comment, anyone, if you'd like to, on the quality of our voices. I agree with you completely. And in fact, like sometimes when you listen to like a highly produced podcast, like an NPR type of podcast, I think it made fun of it for it a lot. But like I have a self-diagnosed misophonia. You ever heard of that?
No, that sounds like it's made up.
I know it. I mean, it literally sounds like misophonia. Like I'm doing an offensive impression of an Asian lady saying I'm so phony. It's when you it's when you it's like you hear like mouth noises. I can't handle them. It's like ruins so like NPR podcasts or whatever. He'll hear like, could you take a drink of water, please? Could you? I listen to a podcast.
Lip smacking. The sound of anyone eating would probably really turn you off.
Oh, dude, yeah. If people don't chew with their mouth closed, I have a buddy, my best friend from high school, best man at my wedding. We're still friends, but it's like, adult friendship where it's less close now.
Sure.
But he would very commonly, we would eat, we'd go get like burgers or something together, right? Bring him back to his house, my house. And then when he was done eating, he would just go for like 15 minutes after, like a dog trying to lick the last fucking bits of nutrition out of the back, like the caverns of their mouth. And it was disgusting. And I would shit on him constantly for it.
That's rough.
Here's what I say. You have to shame these people. You can't let them get away with it. You can't just be easygoing on stuff like this because we live in a society and we can't have people walking around doing that.
I'm with you on it's like, to me, it's constructive feedback. If you're telling somebody that something they do is very annoying, like,
yes,
it's possible it could be a you problem. It might not actually be that annoying. It might just be something that bothers you.
Yes.
But chances are, if you're like a normal human being and this person in front of you is doing something that you perceive to be annoying, it's probably annoying to somebody else too. So go ahead and let them know. If you guys are friends, now if it's a stranger, maybe don't do it to a stranger.
Sure.
But
Yeah,
if you know each other, sure.
one, I have ultimate respect for people when you say, "Hey, man, I got some feedback," and they're like, "Absolutely love it. Please give it to me." So much respect for that. I worked with a comic this weekend who was, I was like, "Hey, can I give you a little feedback on hosting?" And he's like, "Absolutely, love to hear it." I told him a thing that was like, it's not like you suck, you're not funny. It was like, "Hey, there's this one little bit better, just a little tiny bit better." And he's like, "Oh, absolutely, never thought of it. Thank you for telling me." Great. Like now I like
Yeah.
that guy so much more than I did, and I
Yeah.
already liked him a decent amount. Chris Jessup, by the way, is the comedian. Go fun. I think it's like Jessup Jokes, some shit like that. Jessop. Very funny comic. I worked with him in Spokane and Post Falls a couple weeks ago, and then like coincidentally in Tacoma last weekend. But yeah, man, absolutely. And also I feel like this mouth thing, it's me. I'm like, I have a real, that's why I say I have misophonia and not normal fucking people's ability to be annoyed by that. I get more
Sure.
annoyed than the average person, but it really does bother me.
Yeah.
I'm trying to like, what I'd like to do is train my daughter to like slowly say this stuff, because you can't be mad at a child for giving you constructive criticism, right? If a child tells you to not eat with your mouth full, then you can't be mad at that child. You can just be like,
Yeah, that's
"Oh, well,
putting a
you're
lot of pressure on your kid.
I'm not
Yeah,
listen. I'm
it's
not
too
gonna. I'm
much.
gonna try to do it passive aggressively because I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I'm gonna try to instill this rule that I genuinely believe. And then she is a tattletale right now. Like she's telling. I gave my dog a treat she didn't deserve the other day, and she's like, "That's not good. She's never gonna learn."
Yeah, I get it, man. Especially around here, we are very passive aggressive in the
Yes.
Pacific Northwest, and I have to feel like maybe that's why we're, as we get older, as we're adults, maybe that's why we just don't have our shit together.
Yeah.
Not fair.
Possible.
Maybe that's what it is. Maybe we could do better because we're not growing up telling people how to act and how to behave. And first, people don't like to be. They never want to be told how to behave. I mean, you see it through social media. Twitter is a really
Sure.
good example, especially in sports. Sports fans never want to be told how to fan. They want to do whatever it is they want to do. Everybody just wants their freedom, right? But every now and then you do need that feedback.
Yeah.
Like we got to improve, right? And the only way to improve is to like be aware, be cognizant of these things that you need to improve upon.
And
So
I want to make this clear because I have friends and family that listen to this, and they would say that I'm much more confrontational than I'm letting on. Absolutely true. But that's through years of dealing with people who are not all from the Pacific Northwest. And also, it's you still, when you deal with someone from the Pacific Northwest, you have to like couch things in. Like I will say, when I know something's true or I absolutely believe something, I will say, I think this thing, because it softens it enough. And you have to do that for one of our us delicate Pacific Northwesterners. I'm certainly not that way with everybody. I would love it if we could say what we mean and say it the way we mean it and not face backlash for it. But we live in the world we live in. We can't change it. So
you're a contrarian though too. Like you're the type of person that likes to push back almost for the sake of pushing back, almost just for the sake of pushing.
Yeah.
And I'm the type of person that generally tries to be agreeable or at least amenable to like most people, because in my experience that gets you farther in life. It just does.
It gets you farther in some regards. I think yeah. I mean, what I will say, our mutual friend Kevin Martinez, one time I was interviewing him and we were talking about, he's like, I've had Kevin Martinez has been very generous with his time with me. He's let me do a couple podcasts with him that it's like, you should not be wasting your time with this, but thank you for doing it. And we got done with one and we were talking about stuff like our favorite things in like Seattle and food and stuff like that. And he's like, where are you from? And I'm like, oh, I'm from here. He's like, no way. And I was like, yeah, like, not Seattle, but like, right, Tacoma area. And he's like, I could have sworn you were from New York. And it's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me.
He said the exact same thing to me. I think that's his thing. I think he tells everybody that. Yeah.
This is brutal to find out. Kevin Martinez, you bastard.
Or I mean, we're both somewhat similar, so maybe that's it. But also, it's like, when you hear those types of things, they just come across. See, that's being amenable to people. That's what I do too. That's why you get farther ahead in life.
Yeah.
See, you're learning the playbook. Okay, we've already spent way too much time talking about this. We got a lot of. I feel like we have good sports topics today. I looked at your original list and I was like, "This is shit." We're scrapping.
So I saw you. You said one you don't want to talk about, and I actually wanted to talk about it for the reason that you don't want to talk about it, which is. But was there any you cut off of there besides that one?
No, there was only two topics on there. One I knew we were going to talk about regardless. And I'll be honest, I'm not usually a big contributor to our topic sheet, as only you would know, but everyone else should know.
When we say if we started on time and it's a miracle, I'm here on time. I'm here 5 minutes early every time. You're here 2 minutes late.
I beat you here today. Yeah,
you did. You did.
It's not only was
I will say I set up the stream at about 7 o'clock this morning, so I was technically here in advance. But still,
here's the thing: like the extent of the time that I give to you, Casey, is showing up to do this podcast, and then things that are on my schedule. Like if I want to go have a beer with you or something, I'll usually hit you up out of the blue, or if we go golf or something like that. But I feel like that is just adulthood friendships in general.
Of course.
The other day, and I'm going to out my friends a little bit, because the other day I asked them if any of them wanted to go to the Mariner game with me on Saturday. Like my wife's doing something, she's taking the baby. Suddenly I have some time on my hands where I could go to a Mariner game out of the blue. And they like all the friends I asked, for the most part, there's a couple that have kids and a couple that don't. The ones who have kids, I'm not expecting them to say yes, because they're like me. It's like the chances of the stars aligning so that we both have a free day at the same time, very slim. But for the ones who don't have kids, right? Like, here's the thing you have to realize as a grown-ass adult who doesn't have kids.
I'm glad we're in kid talk, because we haven't been doing enough kid talk lately. We got to get back to
I feel like we'll set the rest of the show here in just a second. But I feel like this is something I didn't fully understand prior to having kids.
By the way, fuck you, Matt Holt. We're doing kid talk. We're doing kid talk.
I haven't had a child for a year. I haven't had a child for a year yet, but I already understand what my role was previously as a childless adult, and how I think I fulfilled it for the most part, because I'm pretty down, most of the time, especially prior to having a kid. If somebody hits me up and says, "Hey, you want to go do whatever?" I'm usually down to do whatever.
Sure.
But as an adult with a child now, that's all changed. We know that about parents. The availability to go do whatever it is you want to do, very slim. However, your role as an adult who is not a parent is to say yes whenever your friends with kids want to do something. That's your role. And you know why that's your role? Because you have ultimate freedom all the time. Even if you're married or in a relationship with a partner that might be even on the controlling side, the amount of freedom you have is so much more than your friends who have kids. It's so much more than you can even possibly conceive. And I'm not like blaming you. Like if you chose not to have kids, or you're not a kid person, that's cool. Like I understand. I totally understand. But you got to be down, man. That is your role in the friend group when you are the adult or the adults who do not have kids. You got to be down and ready to go on a moment's notice.
I just want Alex's wife to know, because she listens to this podcast, and I got screenshots.
Maybe she does. I don't know. She's like, "Wait, you do this on Thursday now?" And I was like, "Yeah, shows how closely you pay attention."
She was an avid listener, and then she got a couple mentions, and I don't think she liked them. So it's possible she's turned us off. But I got several screenshots of this question from Alex from all of his friends. I wasn't on the list, for the record, but I was also not available, by the way. But I'm just like me saying, no, actually, I wasn't available. Actually, I rejected Alex. But I think this is all code for when he says you got to be down, you're a childless. No, this Alex was getting prostitutes or going to the strip club. There's no way this is a Mariners game he's talking about. Mariners game is a euphemism for something wild and insane that he was doing with his life. There's no way he's got this much tied up in a Mariners game. But I get it. Listen, look, 2024, I have to accept you as you are.
The only degenerate thing I do is go to the casino. And the only times I do go to the casino, it's at the most degenerate hour. It'll be like 9 a.m. on a weekday, and I'm like, hey.
Hey, did I just change? Did my sound change again? I'm so annoyed with this program, StreamYard.
No, it's fine. Good. You're fine. You're doing great.
The whole settings were fucking erased when I logged in, and now I'm back. Okay. Anyway, we got sports topics to talk about. You wanna set those?
Yeah,
up
let's
for
run
us?
them down. So we knew we were going to talk about the Tom Brady roast. I mean, it's an intersection of two things you care deeply about: comedy and sports.
Don't make this just me. You like comedy too.
I do I sympathize with comedy because I understand what comedians are going through.
I hate this.
All the self-loathing.
You can't just say I like comedy. You got to go like, I feel empathy for you.
I'm the same way. That's part of the joke. That's part of the joke.
Okay.
I just don't want to I don't have the desire to get up on stage and do it. That's me. It's not for me.
Sure.
That's why I think that's why I respect comedians so much. So we have to talk about
it's got to be this fucking respect. This is the new philosophers thing. I was watching a clip where we talked about comedians being the new philosophers. You're making, anyways. Go ahead, Alex. Continue with our topics.
So we got to talk about the Tom Brady roast. I know that's a big thing. We'll put that in there somewhere. I guess we're talking about Russell Wilson. I didn't know we were talking about Russell Wilson.
Yeah, this is a new edition.
Okay, yeah. So we'll bring that up. I think we had a couple other things on there. Potentially talking a little bit about the Sonics coming back. I feel like we have to start with the obvious, though, which is this is what you wrote on the sheet. This is what I'm going to tell people you wrote on the sheet. It said something to the effect of Mariners are still rolling.
Okay, okay, that's fine. I'm fine with arguing with about that because they lost a game today already, right?
Yes, they did. They lost the series. They've lost 3 out of their last 4. So they're not. I mean, at the
3 out of their last 4 games.
Yes, a few days ago, I would agree with you. They were still rolling, but now there are some cracks in the armor. So I think we got to start there because the last couple of days have not been kind to the Mariners. They went into Minnesota. Now Minnesota is every year. I feel like the Minnesota Twins are the exact same team every year. They're like, you look at them on paper, you're like, these guys, they're not very good, and then they outplay what you would expect. They're like everybody in the Central is kind of like this, where the Central's never that strong, the AL Central. So it's kind of like you have teams that are barely above 500 that on any given day will look much better than that. Right. And like the Twins are one of those teams, like, I feel like they never look bad. Like they never go out and get their ass kicked, really. They always kind of hang around in games. But at the end of the year, you're like, okay, they're like a little bit above 500, and there's nobody on that roster that really, really scares you, right? They're just kind of like a bunch of slightly above average dudes that kind of outplay their potential. And as a unit, they're pretty strong. But the Mariners going to Minnesota, and for all intents and purposes, they got it handed to them. They got their ass kicked. They had their one win in the series was very impressive. They scored 10 runs in their one win, which is a season high or ties a season high. So they did have one very positive game in there. A game in which the Mariners had to come back twice to actually retake the lead and ultimately win. So it wasn't like it was a dominating 10-run performance. It was, they really needed all 10 of those runs, but the other 3 games, they didn't look so good. Their old problems seem to come back. They get guys on base, but they can't drive them in. They're striking out at what I would call a remarkable clip. It's not necessarily historic, but it's very bad. It's worse than it was a year ago. And they're striking out a lot, obviously. And then probably the most concerning thing at this point in time, the last 2 games, their starting pitching, their 2 best starting pitchers, George Kirby and Logan Gilbert, have looked vulnerable. They've both got it, they both got hammered by a Twins offense that, again, on paper is they're not world beaters, but for whatever reason, Kirby and Gilbert they had rough first innings in their starts, and they really never rebounded as their starts went on. So that's probably the bigger issue, is that, the pitching up to this point has basically carried the Mariners ball club. They've had to be perfect because of the flaws in the offense. And suddenly over the past couple of days, they've looked like a little bit rockier than we would expect. So that's kind of where we're at with these guys.
And this is, I'm kind of surprised that this fan base kind of unites around like a single issue. I will say, like, of all the fan bases in Seattle, I find that the most, like, to use a potentially aged term, the most like group-thinky fan base is the Mariners. The Mariners, you're either like an analytics guy and you're all the way down the analytics road, or you're the opposite. The sky is falling all the time. It's all about some narrative and the narrative folks and the analytics folks occasionally cross paths, and it feels like in this case they've crossed paths because the Mariners are striking out a ton. They lead the league in strikeouts. This is the Fangraphs, by the way. The team leaderboards. They lead the league in strikeouts, and it's also like by a pretty hefty margin. They're striking out 28.3% of the time. The Rockies are next in line. Rockies a terrible team, by the way.
Yeah.
The Reds are next at 26.5, 26.3. That's a pretty big gap at the bottom of the leaderboard. Those are two like really, really, really bad offenses, by the way. I will say this. It's bad. Like, and especially to be, I guess we should start with this. I think you and I'll speak for me, and you can just give me a nod or two blinks if you agree. I think Jerry Dipoto deserves to be fired. So I'm going to say that to start with, because I'm going to say some stuff that kind of sounds like I'm trying to pour cold water on an angry issue for fans. It's not. I don't feel that. I don't feel like this any of what I'm going to say should absolve Jerry Dipoto. But so the Mariners lead the league in strikeouts. That is true. I do think I will say, because your note in this was, what do the Mariners need to do to like change philosophically?
I guess, I would just kind of preface that by saying, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why the Mariners, especially their offense, is struggling. I mean, you could look at it strictly as like personnel. They didn't bring in enough guys who can actually hit to make their offense better or lengthen their offense. But I think the reason I see it as a philosophical problem is they really preach strategy, right? Like the Mariners, whether they're actually living the things that they say or not, they publicly preach dominate the zone, control the zone. They preach all these philosophies. It's kind of like when you work for a company that talks all the time about culture and how great the culture is and how everybody gets along, and yet everyone's still an asshole, right? Like we all know those companies that on paper, they're really kind of paying these things lip service, but they're not actually carrying them out behind the scenes. That's kind of what it feels like the Mariners are doing with their philosophies. Now, their control the zone philosophy obviously works very well for pitching. Whatever they're doing with their pitchers, it works. They've not only proven that they can take talented starting pitchers and make them excel to an all-star level, but they take, average relief pitchers off the scrap heap and turn them into, leverage arms. So clearly it's working for pitching, but whatever that philosophy is with hitting, it hasn't worked for a number of years now, to the point where your talented guys like the Julios of the world, they keep getting off to these slow starts. They really can't find it. And it almost seems like once a guy like Julio gets it going, it's not because he's buying into some philosophy necessarily. It's like he just starts something clicks, with him, because he's just that talented. With a lot of these other guys, it's like whatever the philosophy is, it has them going up there and looking for the long ball every single time, to the point where even a casual fan should be able to see when these guys go up there and take hacks. I mean, they are swinging off their heels every single time. It looks like a slow pitch softball team up there. No one's looking for a base hit. Everyone is looking to hammer the ball. And to their credit, most of the guys in this lineup can hit home runs. But, there's a big difference between a guy who gets 10 to 15 home runs a year trying to take it out of the park every time and a guy who hits 40 bombs a year trying to do that. Like, you can live with it with the 40 home run guy. But if you're a guy who's going to hit 10 or 15 home runs a year, like, shouldn't you be looking for contact most of the time? Like, the long ball is not your friend necessarily. So whatever this philosophy is that has them striking out so much while hunting for, whether it's exit velo, launch angle, or just to hammer the baseball as hard as you can, the shit's not working. So it has to change.
Yeah. So I basically, I think you're right that there's like a talent issue. I do think there's also a thing, and I just wanted to show this to you because you'll hear people sometimes talk about like batted ball luck or bad luck in baseball. And it's like, a lot of times that's from a narrative perspective, but some of this you can actually quantify statistically. So I look at the Mariners, they have one of the worst whiff rates in baseball. That's not going to be a surprise because they have the highest strikeout rate in baseball, obviously, but they're not actually the worst whiff rate in baseball. Their zone contact percentage is relatively low, but again, it's not the worst in baseball. And some of the same offenders are there. Their like zone swing percentage is is and I guess what I'm saying is like there are things that like make up a like a strikeout stat. There are things that contribute to that. The Mariners are not really they've struck out at a very high rate. I think that anybody looking at these numbers would say it's obvious why they're striking out at an extremely high rate. It's because they can't hit the ball and they swing out of the zone too much. That's definitely true. But the degree to which they're being affected by that, to me, feels like it's bad luck, which is crazy to say when you're like, also, they're a really, really bad team at these specific things. They're like a bottom third team in all these things, but they are like probably close to a standard deviation worse than the second, than like the next worst team, next whatever, next worst team. And they're not that bad. They're actually probably, so what I'm telling you, one thing I will say is as the season goes on, they're almost certainly going to be better because their sequencing luck gets better because sequencing luck levels out as time goes on. And it's not going to be because don't immediately give it like the narrative stamp of approval because they probably didn't actually do anything to fix it, is going to be what I'm going to say. It's going to get a little bit better. They probably didn't do anything. They're just a little bit less shitty than they actually look on paper.
And I think, but that kind of leads me back to the whole philosophy thing. It's like, whatever the philosophy is that you're theoretically carrying through the entire season from spring training to the end of the year, that's the problem. To me, that's the problem because even when we see the Mariners offense improve, it's improving from such a low bar.
Sure.
That it's not like they're becoming top of the league in offense. They're just getting to an average level because the bar was so low for them to overcome. When you're starting from the bottom, you don't necessarily make it all the way to the top, right? And that's kind of how it feels with the Mariners offense. Now, maybe the front office, maybe the coaching staff, they understand that going in. They look at the guys they have on paper, they look at their metrics, they look at these people and they say, there's no way we're ever going to be more than an average offense, even at our best. But if that's the case, then you have to account for it in other ways. I get right now and we've talked about this before, they're a one-trick pony. They have great pitching. Their defense sucks. Their offense sucks, but they have great pitching. And now the problem that, this is why I said the last couple of days have been a little bit concerning, is because all of a sudden their pitching staff seems vulnerable, or at least their two best pitchers who had really been cruising up to this point. Now, maybe it's just a matter of the team they were playing, the Twins, happened to just be that good at hitting the baseball that they're going to make any pitching staff look bad. The Mariners come back home now. They're facing the Oakland A's. Oakland A's on paper should be terrible, but it's I would call it a pretty interesting series because the A's are right behind the Mariners in the standings and have really, really outplayed what anybody thought.
I think the key is not having any fans in the stadium. I think that's what's helping them.
They have no pressure. The A's are the ultimate definition of a team that should have zero pressure on their shoulders. None of those guys on the roster are name guys. A lot of them are younger. So, they're just, in a lot of cases, probably just happy to be here to some degree. And they're nomadic. They don't have a home beginning next year. They're moving out of Oakland. They're moving to Sacramento for a couple of years and then possibly to Vegas. So yeah, they have no reason to feel tight anytime they go out there and play. They've been playing. I was actually looking at the A's last few weeks. Now they lost the last couple games. They kind of been put in their place by the Rangers a little bit, but we know how good the Rangers are. Prior to that, they won some big series against good competition. So they're playing well right now. And I actually think where your typical A's Mariners series is nothing, and most A's Mariners series are low draw, not that, exciting of an affair. This one actually means a little bit just because of where they are in the standings. The fact that the two bottom teams in the AL West right now are effectively out of it. The Astros and the Angels, of course, we expect the Astros will make a surge at some point. The Angels probably won't, just looking at how their roster is constructed and the perennial injuries they have.
Well, yeah, Mike Trout's out for a while.
Yeah, but the A's are right there, and it's like if
at least they have Shohei Ohtani to fall back on.
Oh, unfortunate. Yeah, but I'm curious to see, like, when the A's come into town, are the Mariners going to do to them what they did to the Rockies? Bad team on paper that is actually bad, and win that series the way you'd expect? Or are they going to let the A's hang around? Are they going to show some of these vulnerabilities that they've been showing the past few days against the Twins and let that become an issue, basically. I mean, I think the one thing in Major League Baseball, the first month of the year, and we're now past that, but the first month of the year is often dominated, I feel like, by pitching. You got cold weather in a lot of cities. The pitchers kind of have the advantage. A lot of hitters just haven't really warmed up yet. We always see the ball start flying as the weather warms up. And so you kind of expect pitching to dominate.
Also, pitchers are fresh.
Yeah, you expect pitching to dominate and carry a team through the first month of the season. That's exactly what happened with the Mariners. So you would expect a little bit of regression from the Mariner pitching staff just because of how good they have been. Like, they've been as good as advertised for a lot of these guys, but also probably better than that. Yeah, they've been better. I mean, for sure. So you would expect some regression there. But if the pitching staff is going to regress, you have to hope and expect that the Mariners offense will start to improve a little bit. And if that doesn't happen, then what you have is a real problem, because now you're going to start losing more games than you're winning. And right now you're only a couple games over 500. I mean, I know even the Mariners just being a couple games over 500, it feels like you're reserving your playoff tickets, because there's been so few seasons where they are even that good above average. But there's a lot of season left to play. The Rangers are the defending world champs in your division. You've got the Astros, who are always going to be there. Now you got this threat of the A's for whatever they are. And if you're the Mariners, man, you got to continue to make hay right now. And so just kind of seeing these, in some ways, two ships passing in the night, with the pitching potentially declining a little bit and the offense potentially getting better, but not showing any signs of doing that right now, it's going to be interesting to see where they go at this point.
Okay, one last thing on this. The Mariners are one of the worst offenses in baseball by expected weighted on base. When it's park adjusted, WRC plus, it's they're about a league average offense. So take from that what you want. They're actually, this is kind of an interesting, the league on average is a little more lucky than they are unlucky. Sorry, they're a little more, the league on average is a little bit unlucky technically compared to this weighted on base average stat. The Mariners are less unlucky. So they're actually, by this weighted on base average, they're more lucky than the average team and still suck. They're still one of the worst offenses in baseball by this specific statistic. Their pitching staff, which I'll show you real quickly before we bore everyone by giving them essentially a fucking PowerPoint here, is their pitching staff, by that exact same stat, is the best in baseball. So it is exactly what you think. They have a very good pitching staff. They have a very bad offense. And I don't know. Like, the thing that is annoying is it's not really Jerry DiPoto's 2024 acquisitions that are bringing it down. It's Julio Rodriguez, if we're being honest. The biggest gap in expectation compared to reality is what you're getting out of Julio Rodriguez.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to scapegoat the best players on the team. We've been doing that. I mean, you've been doing that. We've talked about it a lot. And it's fair to say, like, hey, if your best hitters don't get going, then, you're probably going to suck. But at the same time, you've been kind of getting unexpected contributions from guys like Josh Rojas, who has emerged as your best hitter in this stretch, which is kind of funny.
The guy you hated, you would not let him have a peaceful offseason.
Well, the point I'm trying to make is that he's been outplaying his potential, and the fact, like, he's probably not going to do this all year. So at some point he's going to regress. Is he going to regress at the same time that the middle of the order guys that you're counting on step up, or are they all just going to suck together? Because if they all suck together, then this gets worse. The point about the stat that you brought up, kind of their luck versus unluckiness or luckiness. When you strike out a lot, you're not going to be as susceptible to finding yourself lucky or unlucky, because you're just flat out not putting the ball in play. I do think their strikeouts have some sequencing luck shit with them. Their strikeouts should improve with no philosophy change, with no tactical change. Not to say they couldn't improve more if something that's a little more squishy changes, something that's a philosophical change. A personnel change would probably be the biggest change they could make, is like multiple personnel changes instead of trying to talk Julio Rodriguez out of chasing. I'm not saying that you need to replace Julio Rodriguez, but I'm saying, like, these guys who are problems strikeout wise, getting them to stop swinging at balls out of the zone or stop swinging and missing is going to be very difficult compared to finding people that don't do that. Yeah, I mean, this is where strikeouts are just so hurtful. Is like, the Mariners in this one series against the Twins a couple days ago, the day that they score 10 runs, they score 10 runs on 10 hits. That's weird. You don't usually 10 runs, you have 15, 16, 17 hits to go along with it. So 10 runs on 10 hits is weird. A couple I can't remember, I think it was the very next day they score 3 runs on 10 hits. So the volatility there between the run scoring kind of points to the strikeout problem, right? Like, you're getting these guys on base. One game you happen to drive them in, but you did it with the long ball, which has been their MO, hitting home runs, driving guys in with home runs. It's like, if they don't hit a home run, they're not getting those guys in from second base or third base because they're not making productive outs. And there's something to be said for productive outs. It's why people criticize stats like batting average, for example, because you can be a very productive hitter by making productive outs, moving a guy over or getting a guy in on a fielder's choice, for example, right? Like, things like that can be helpful, but the Mariners aren't even putting the ball in play to get those guys in when they're standing there on third base. So that, that strikeout issue really becomes a problem as a result of that.
Yeah. I will say, and this is maybe, I just would like a quick answer from you, and I suspect we'll have a decent chance of seeing an off season that starts in early October to talk about this maybe more like on a grand scale. But since 2001, the Mariners have they've never had a season where they were more than 10% better than league average, according to WRC Plus. Most of those years, as you'd expect, they're worse than league average. And this is a park adjusted stat, by the way. This is not something that's just exclusively a product of Safeco, now T-Mobile Park. What do you think? Is it? It can't just be because free agents don't want to come here because they won't hit here, because there have been free agents that have come here, and also teams aren't built from free agents. Their free agents are, the dressing on a salad, not the primary thing that's in the salad. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So to me, it feels like two things.
Also, 1 second. Let me. I want to say one thing before I let you fucking wriggle out of this. It's also multiple philosophies. It's also multiple front offices. It's multiple coaches that have all had this exact same problem, basically. It hasn't always been strikeouts. The Mariners have not been able to put together a very good offense since 2001.
Well, I mean, just looking at the regime that's there now, the Dipoto regime, their philosophy has probably been very close to the same the entire time they've been there. And at least for the past few years, the offense hasn't been any good. So that's why you kind of have to look at the philosophy and say, they've shuffled out the various coaches who work with the offense. They turn that personnel over all the time. So it's not the personnel, right? Like, those guys keep changing. The offense keeps sucking, So it's like, whatever the message is that they're trying to get through to the players from the top down, that seems to be part of the problem, right? Like, that has to be at least some of the problem, even if they don't want to admit that. The other problem is that these guys, we know ownership has basically given them a free pass. I mean, their feet have never really been held to the fire. They're in year 500 now, it seems like, on the job, and there's no end in sight. Nothing you could ever say about Jerry Dipoto or his entire regime will get them fired. So they're basically operating without any reason to have to change their philosophy, right? And you don't have to go do the work to change your philosophy if you know it's not going to hurt you in the long run. But the other issue, I mean, when it comes to the personnel itself on the field, the batters that you have, there is something to be said for a lineup as a unit. If you take a great hitter like Julio Rodriguez and you put him in a batting order where he has like no protection, right? If he's batting 2, but your 3-hole hitter right now, Jorge Polanco, is not really a guy that scares you. Like, not only is Jorge Polanco hitting sub 200 right now, but Jorge Polanco is not striking fear into the hearts of pitchers. He's just not. Like, that's not a thing that's going to happen. You're not going to be worried about, you're not going to feel the same way about Aaron Judge walking up to the plate as you do about Jorge Polanco. So there's something to be said for the lineup as a whole, because right now, even your best hitters, they just don't have anybody protecting them. The Mariners get so fixated on like handedness in a lineup, going right, left, all the way down. They get fixated on handedness against pitchers. So, your righties against your lefties and so on, that it almost seems like their lineup construction doesn't necessarily prioritize their best hitters. Like, Cal Raleigh is probably outside of Julio, probably your most feared hitter in that lineup. But his position in the lineup, the batting order often changes, right? Like that's a guy that should be entrenched at 3 or 4 in this lineup because he's a switch hitter, so you don't have to worry about the handedness thing. And then B, he's a guy that can, with any swing, can take the ball out of the park. Jorge Polanco is not really a home run hitter. Putting him at 3 to protect Julio seems foolish in some ways. If you look at a guy like Teoscar Hernandez, who was here last year, he pretty much batted 4 or 5, I think, for most of the entire year. That's where he was in the lineup, but he didn't hit very well. Now he goes to Los Angeles. He's playing for the Dodgers, and he's doing great. Now he might regress, like his numbers might come down, but you have to think like being in a better lineup with so many great hitters around him, that takes a lot of the pressure off him. It means not only is the pressure off him, but he's going to see better pitches to hit because, Teoscar Hernandez is not your main worry with that Dodgers lineup, right? It's probably Shohei Ohtani or some of these other guys. Well, the thing about Julio in this lineup without any other guys to back his ass up, he's getting tough pitches to hit every single time because if you're a pitcher, you're going to unload the arsenal on Julio, knowing that Jorge Polanco's ass, who might get you for a single, is coming up next. Like, who gives a shit? Who gives a shit what Jorge Polanco does to you? You're worried about Julio hitting the ball out of the park. And then when you got, Ty France in there, just one of two things is going to happen with Ty France, right? He's either going to strike out or he's going to ground into a double play. These are guys that aren't threatening to you as a pitcher or as an opposing team because even their best outcomes aren't really going to hurt you that much. And because they're so fixated on hitting home runs, that really puts the spot that they're looking for a pitch to hit. It makes it very, very, very narrow, right? So you can work those corners and they're going to saw off a pitch. They're going to ground, they're going to roll it over. They're going to pull it. They're going to, they're going to do things that you want them to do with those pitches. And it just seems like because of that philosophy, it makes this team susceptible to not just striking out a lot, but, putting together these bad at bats that compound this problem over and over and over again and really kind of write the playbook for how to get them out.
I have a lot of that I disagree with, or I think is not well quantified. But I don't want to. We have a whole season to grind this to a fine powder.
Yeah, and I'll just say, like, a lot of that, what I just said, cannot be quantified very easily. I mean, I think there are two sides of baseball. I think there's the quantifiable and the qualifiable. And some of the it's like when you talk about any person, like anybody you've ever worked with, right? There are tangibles and there are intangibles. Some people are just, they produce work, but they're like assholes. So their intangibles suck, but their tangibles are great. I think there's that element to baseball. And I think as analytics have risen and have a place in the game, we tend to overlook a lot of the qualifiables that, just the whole, what becomes like this engine of a team working together to actually produce. Like the Twins are a great example of that in this series. Nobody on that team is like a metrics darling necessarily, but for whatever reason, they hit the shit out of the ball against the Mariners.
I guess what I would say is I think there's studies that kind of go against some of the stuff you said. But what I will say is, regardless of what the studies say, regardless of what analytics say, and the constant opposition and push and pull of analytics versus quantification versus qualification, all that stuff, which I agree with. I agree that like it does exist, and I'm open to that idea. It doesn't matter because this team is nominally an analytics focused team, which by the way they all are at this point. They're not. The Mariners aren't even close to unique. They're part of. I would suspect that the Mariners are one of the dumber teams analytics wise in baseball. And so I don't really think. I think this idea that we just have this idea in our mind that Jerry DiPoto is fucking early 2000s Billy Bean, and he's not that. He's a fucking idiot. He's not.
He does a really good job of convincing you he's the smartest person in the room. But I think your point is important. Every single team in Major League Baseball is so bought into analytics and so much more bought into analytics than anybody really thinks.
Yeah, absolutely.
That you kind of have to like wipe that away. That is almost, it's not really a variable at this point. Every team does it and invests a ton in that side of things. So you just have to look at the results. And you're right. They probably do suck at it compared to other teams because the end result.
But they talk about it so much more that people get fooled.
Yeah, they do. It's like when we've all worked with people that behave in this way, the way that Jerry DiPoto does, right? We've all worked with somebody who does a really good job promoting themselves and working their way up the chain because they're just bullshitters.
And some people convince everybody call that guy to like Alex Akita.
I'm not above. I am not above doing what I got to do to advance myself.
I guess that's like, to me, the reason I don't even want to dig into it is the finer points, the like hair splitting of analytics versus narrative. It's irrelevant. This team has been shitty for most of his regime.
Right.
They're constantly making these moves that are just these like kind of hedges on getting like small marginal gains, where I think like pick a fucking direction. Either go through free agency, which they're obviously not going to do, or build a team that is just so deep. The Astros, what we see the Astros doing is not necessarily going out and spending a bunch in free agency, right? It's next man up. They have another guy in their farm system ready to replace whoever gets injured, whoever leaves in free agency, whoever stops being effective, or the Dodgers, who just spend until they're going to be in luxury tax hell. The Mariners don't want to do either of those things. They're stuck between these philosophies, not really committed to either. Doesn't matter if it's analytics or whatever. This is a team that's, I think, destined to be mediocre at the very minimum until this front office is gone.
They're a gambler. They're a gambler who will never raise their bet and is happy walking out of the casino with a $5 profit. Even if
that's not even right. Profit in the sense of actual money. I'm talking like they're fine. They're like, well, that every time they leave the casino, they're like, well, $20 is a pretty cheap day of entertainment.
Yeah,
like they lost $20 every time.
That's exactly what it is. It's like you could have had $1 million, right?
Yes.
Like you could have won or lost $1 million. The Mariners are like so afraid to like lose all their money at the casino that they will never make the wager to win, right?
Absolutely.
Like that's kind of the way I see it. And looking at it in gambling terms, it's like if you're a Jeopardy fan, you probably know James Holzhauer. James Holzhauer is probably the greatest Jeopardy player of all time. One of the things he did, because he had a background in gambling and in sports, is he would always, anytime he hit a daily double, he recognized the value of a daily double, and he would more often than not wager all of his winnings on that one question. A, because he was smart enough to know he was probably going to get it right. But B, because he saw like, hey, this is a chance to double my money that nobody else has, that only comes along 3 times in these games of Jeopardy.
Yeah.
And he took advantage of that, that variable right there. And the Mariners are like terrified to play the game that way, right? They play extremely conservatively, both fiscally, which we've talked a lot about, and just in the way that they do things, the way the people that they bring in, their philosophies themselves. It's like they're trying to find a marginal victory of 1%, which is fine. Like, if you're profiting 1%, it's still a profit, but they're happy with that. Like the goal in baseball is to win the championship. It's not to improve incrementally every year or within the context of a year. It's to win a championship. And that does not seem to be their understanding of what the objective is.
Yeah. The Mariners are like someone who goes to the casino and doesn't understand the concept of the casino's rake. And they're like, I won 85 games. It's like, you still lost. 85 games is still a loss. You didn't make the playoffs. You've never won a championship. You're no closer than you were a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. I mean, these might not be fully vetted out ideas. It's just, this is why I'm like always hesitant to put them on. This is like it's like, how many decades are we going to keep having the same conversation?
Yeah.
I feel like baseball has almost gotten boring because it's like, every year they're going to have stretches of good, stretches of bad. They're probably going to win somewhere between 75 and 85 games and never make an attempt to really win a championship. I'm fine with them not spending money. I would be fine with a full-scale rebuild, but it's too late now. You started the clock again on Julio Rodriguez like you did with Felix Hernandez, so now you're going to spend this time trying to like keep these bobbleheads moving instead of fucking... You know what I mean? Like it's you of course you know what I mean.
It's frustrating. I mean, it's so funny because we've talked about this before. But
I also like how we were about to end this topic and now we're 10 minutes further in, and I'm more passionate about it than I was 10 minutes ago.
Well, it's like in the NFL and the NBA, like if dudes have a 500 season, they're fired. Like everyone, like clean house, everyone's gone. Like and the NFL and the NBA are like almost too reactive to bad seasons, whereas in Major League Baseball, you got teams. I mean, the Mariners are not unique in this. You have other franchises that year after year after year, they pretty much suck and get away with it, right? It's just maybe it's because it's such a long season, because it spans so much time and so many games that like you can't, even as most fans, especially the ones who pay the bills and go to the games, right, cannot be that passionate about it compared to the NFL and the NBA, because there's just not the same spotlight on every single game in baseball as there is in basketball and football. So I don't know what it's just funny because it's like none of these three leagues kind of like find the middle ground, like how to react to a good or bad season appropriately. They overreact in baseball, or they overreact in the NBA and the NFL, and they probably underreact in Major League Baseball. And that's how you get stuck like the Mariners, where you're just in purgatory basically, which is really only hurts the fans. You know, the players come and go, personnel comes and goes, but we're always going to be here and we just want to win.
I know. And it's and I feel like as a city going through like and you and I were born, so I was born in 86, you're probably born in like 73. I don't know, you're very old. What are you, 85?
84.
Okay.
Well, probably not even 2 years ahead of
Wait, shit. Are you 40 yet?
No, not yet. I turned 40 this year.
What month?
Year. Not until October. It's a ways away.
Okay.
Yeah, we got time.
Anyway, we're going to have a special episode. We're going to have a special episode that's obviously not on your actual birthday, but where you actually come into the studio and we drink some whiskey together for the first time in a year.
Talk about my 40 years on this earth.
Your disgusting 40-year-old body.
I'll tell my entire life story in 90
minutes. Thank you. That's what I was hoping for. Anyways, when I was growing up, 1979 Sonics championship, where nobody would shut up about, even though like I think it was the 84 Seahawks when they went to the NFC championship game. That was like the crowning achievement post Sonics championship was the 1984 Jim Zorn and Steve Largent and maybe a rookie Kurt Warner and Chuck Knox, Ground Chuck. The Seahawks had an identity, and it was like that was the thing. And I spent my entire childhood watching Dennis Erickson-led Seahawks teams. And frankly, like, I love Lou Piniella, but, like, the 90s Mariners had no, like, until 95, 96, they had no identity basically outside of, like, the shitty team with the best players in baseball somehow. How that happened, I don't really understand. And, just, like, it never felt like, as a fan base, there was ever going to be a championship. So it was like kind of, let's just enjoy sports as they are. And then the Seahawks win, and it changes things. The Seahawks have a decade of elite success.
Yeah.
They're not a dynasty, but a decade of elite success. For Seattle, they're a dynasty. And now you're like, yeah, everybody should do that. Can we talk about the fucking Sonics coming back? Because I'd like to talk about something that I'm actually going to be invested in instead of this. It's very hard for me. I want to touch about. I also put on the list. This is the one you crossed off most vehemently. Was talking about the Huskies spring game. All I want to say about it is Alex hates you Huskies fans. That's why I got the Cougars hat. Are you wearing the Cougars hat right now? By the way,
no, I'm wearing a Rainiers hat. I said I'm as big a UW fan as there is, but there's nothing less exciting than spring football.
I think it was a very well attended game. I think that it's probably, and I don't know what it was like in the Don James era, but I think in recent eras, it's one of the better attended games.
They had like 18 or 19,000. Like it's okay.
Sure, like, it's not what they're getting in the SEC. I understand that. It's what I will say is it is very hard to go from how much I loved the 2023 Washington Huskies team and the 2022 Washington Huskies team to this team that's like new quarterback, entirely new receiving core. The offensive line is mostly gone. The coaches are all different. The defense is largely different. Like, I mean, not just the players, but it's like I don't even know. I feel very much like I'm going to need a couple games to reinvest myself because I feel like no connection to this team at this point.
Yeah. The one thing I will agree with you on there is, the fact that it was in a well-attended game. One thing I've noticed, Jed Fish and his staff have done an incredible job marketing the program since they got there. And maybe that's just because they have a pro background. They kind of know what NFL marketing looks like, and they're bringing that to the college level. But yeah, they've done an incredible job marketing this kind of crap sandwich of a product, which it's not even that bad. It's just the drop off from a team that was in the championship a year ago and all the personnel changes that you have after that to whatever this is now that's tough. That's tough to sell. That is a tough sell. And they've done a really good job doing that. So yeah, I mean, even still, and even in spite of that, I still don't want to talk about
it. That's fine. That's actually basically what I wanted to talk about, was like the spring game is like not something that I've ever marked on the calendar or cared about. Heard it was coming up, thought it seemed interesting, didn't go to it myself. Don't want to talk about any of the events.
Marketing didn't work on you, apparently. Almost.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a hangover effect, and I'm not immune to it. So tell me what I know that there's like, so this is my understanding is, the Sonics returning to Seattle is believed to be contingent on the new media deal, the new TV rights deal. That would be when the NBA starts expanding. Adam Silver has made many comments that have flirted with Seattle, to the point that I think if Seattle does not get a team in this next round of expansion, I think there will be a lot of people who there might be a Seattle-based January 6th on the NBA offices. Like, they flirted with us too much. They betrayed us too hard.
This is it. Yeah, you're right. This is it. I mean, they have opened up the window for like negotiating rights on their next TV deal. It's going to happen here at like the conclusion of the season, I guess. And once that happens, I don't really like people, NBA fans that have teams are like debating over who should get the media rights. The same way that like us as Pac-12 fans were like, oh, we don't want to see Apple get the rights. We want, Fox to get the rights or whatever. Like that, those are our first world problems, right? Well, that's kind of what NBA fans are like right now. They're like, we don't want this shit to end up on Amazon Prime. No one wants to watch on Amazon. We want this on TNT, just like it's always been. Of course, if it's not on TNT, then you could lose Inside the NBA. You could lose Charles and Kenny and Ernie. You could lose all your favorite.
Charles was on Club Shay Shay, and it was a great episode.
Oh, I bet. Shannon Sharp and Charles Barkley, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you could, everything could be changing in the NBA media landscape. And of course, for fans of the NBA right now, that's their biggest issue. But for us here in Seattle, and probably the only other city that can maybe feel somewhat similar to how we feel right now, although, they never lost a team, but Las Vegas is also on the hook for a team right now too. So the expectation is they signed this new media rights deal. It's an amazing amount of money. And because of all this money that they're getting in this new rights deal, they can expand by 2 teams. And presumably those 2 teams will be Seattle and Las Vegas. And you're right, if it doesn't happen this time, I mean, there's not going to be another media rights deal for years. And the idea of expansion in the NBA has always hinged on these media rights deals. So yeah, if it doesn't happen now, I mean, then you kind of go back to this square one cycle of like, hey, you have to watch these other cities and see if there's any of these franchises that are kind of floundering that might potentially relocate. And that's where Seattle comes into play. But as far as an expansion team goes, this is Seattle's best chance. Yeah. And it seems to be on the horizon at this point in time.
Well, the other thing about it is, so they left in 2008, I believe.
2008, yep.
I was on KGRG, the Green River Community College radio station, when it was like official, when it became official. And I had to, by the way, announce it to a bunch of fucking emo kids that didn't care, but I went on the air. I was on the air, went on and told them. And you're 16 years removed, 17 or 18 years by the time we get a team here. And it's an entire generation of basketball fans that have grown up without the Sonics. And it's at
weird.
This point, it's like, if it doesn't, first off, it doesn't feel like it was that long ago to me. I know that part of that's just like the passage of time and getting older, and we could, speaking of philosophy, we could get into that, but it doesn't feel like it was that long ago. It seems like that time has gone faster, but also it becomes like, if it's not then, is it 5-10 years after that? And if it's 5 or 10 years after that, like, the NBA fan base is a pretty young fan base compared to the other leagues, is my belief. And you're like, you don't have the culture for it here anymore, and that's the NBA's fault. It's the Thunder, the people who and by the way, I will say, I'm like, at this point, Aubrey McClendon is dead, and fucking nobody that played for the Sonics is on the Thunder anymore. I'm over the Thunder. Like, enjoy your team. I like Oklahoma City as a city. It's a fun city. I actually really enjoy going there for comedy. I'll be there in July with Gabriel Rutledge, and I love that town. I don't know what. It's certainly not. I can see why a 22-year-old Kevin Durant probably doesn't like it as much as as Seattle, but I like it. I'm not mad at them anymore at all.
Can I just make a request? When you go there in July, let's say by then that a team has been announced back to Seattle, hopefully, right? Like that would be
Sure.
best case scenario. If that happens, you got to go on stage wearing something Sonics.
Oh, dude, I talk about the Sonics every single time I go.
Yeah, but I want to see you wear. I want to see like a video of you wearing a Sonics hat.
I don't think that's a loss for them that the Sonics came
back.
No,
they don't get. I've talked with people from Oklahoma City before too.
I bet you they don't even at this point they don't connect it. Yeah, it's only going to be another Seattle one-sided rivalry.
Also, I mean, it's one of those, like you said, I mean, the passage of time has changed things so greatly. Now, I mean, it's like you see these people who, there are a lot of like people in their 20s that like to talk about sports or post about sports online,
sure,
locally, nationally, whatever. And I saw one account the other day that was like, can anybody name this random Sonic? And it was a picture of Bill Cartwright. And I'm like, who the fuck doesn't know Bill Cartwright? And then I was like, well, I'm like almost 40, so there's probably a lot. Most of their followers probably have no idea who Bill Cartwright is, right?
Sure.
Like, so it's things like that where, you know, the people that are now becoming the voice of this next generation, they have no memory of the Sonics, or if they do, it's so cloudy. It's not like they were impassioned when the team left the way we were. They were too young to care that much, right? And so it is becoming this generational thing. When you go an entire generation without an NBA team, then it does become generational and kind of like starts to shift the dynamic where the younger generation is not going to care as much because it's not something that impacts them. So yeah, I mean, I remember like in the aftermath of the Sonics leaving, you know, if you saw somebody in Seattle wearing some Thunder apparel, they were like liable to get their ass beat, right?
You were contractually or societally obligated to boo that person.
Yeah, and now you see kids all the time wearing Thunder stuff. I mean, not like everywhere. It's not prevalent, but like I've seen it plenty of times in the last few years out in public, and it's not like it still catches my eye. Like I see a Thunder jersey, I'm like, what the fuck? But it's not like anybody else cares because it's not something. It's not top of mind anymore, and it makes sense. I mean, if you are as mad about the Sonics today as you were 16 years ago, one of two things is happening: A, you're either lying to yourself because you're not really that mad, or B, like you might be insane. Like you might need some clinical help because it's been 16 years, and like deep down, like when the Sonics come back, assuming they do come back, it's going to be a very emotional experience for the people that were big fans of the team, like you and I. But for the younger crowd, it'll probably just be like how the rest of us felt when the Kraken got here. It's nice to have a team, right? It's just nice to have another distraction out there.
Yeah, I agree with you. So what is I mean, there's nothing really new, right? It's just like Gary Payton did an interview and we're talking about it again. Is there any like I'm excited for the possibility. Obviously the like arena situation figured itself out. That was a big deal when the Kings were going to come. They're going to go play. I see these people who are like, well, they shouldn't use the name the Sonics. You're stupid. They're going to use the name the Sonics. Shut up. Don't. That's done. We don't care about what you think.
We're not pulling a Kraken here. It's
also that was the Metropolitans 100 years ago. It's move on. It's going to be the Sonics. I don't think that I think we should not let those people vote who say that it shouldn't be the Sonics. And I don't mean in the naming. I mean in federal and local elections. I don't think they should. I think they should forfeit their right to vote. It's going to be, by the way, the other thing that's going to happen is a lot like the Kraken are experiencing right now. Obviously, they did not as early, and we saw the Vegas Golden Knights obviously not experience this. Expansion's tough, man. It's going to be a bad team for a little while, probably.
Yeah, and NBA expansion is much different than hockey. And,
sure.
I mean, we've seen it in our lifetimes, you know, the Grizzlies, the Raptors. We've seen other programs before, going back even farther than that, like the Magic and the Heat, the Hornets. I mean, there has been expansion enough, and usually those teams do suck for a while. I mean, you have to get very lucky in the draft. You know, we all remember when, like, well, people of our age remember when the Magic drafted Shaquille O'Neal and basically turned their franchise around much quicker than most expansion teams would. But you have to get very lucky in the draft. You have to make some big signings that are kind of like, you have to get guys to pop that you wouldn't expect to pop necessarily.
Yeah.
A lot of things have to go right in NBA expansion, but that's okay. I think with the Sonics, you know, performance is not going to be nearly as big of an issue as it is with the Kraken, for example. Like the hockey team has to win because frankly, I would probably have to think the majority of the fans that go to games are more casual than passionate when it comes to hockey. And it's no knock on the passionate fans. It's just the reality of that sport. Whereas with basketball, and especially with the NBA, I mean, that was a diehard crowd that showed up all the way to the end. And, it's not going to be as big of an issue to win for the Sonics. People, especially the first couple years.
For the record, if you're out there and you're not like, if you're younger than 37, which is how old I am for a couple more weeks, you maybe aren't like as entrenched in the history of the Sonics. If you want a history of the Sonics leaving Seattle, Sonic Skate is a great documentary about it. The reason the Sonics left Seattle was not because the fans did not support Seattle. That's like a common thing. That in fact, I remember a guy who I respect a lot, but who you and I believe, at the same time, got into arguments separately with Bomani Jones about the city of Seattle's support of the Sonics. And yeah, absolutely. And the thing about hockey, and I'm a casual. I mean, to call me a casual fan would be an insult to casual fans of hockey. I enjoy going to hockey games. I intentionally don't become super invested in the like minutia of hockey. I feel the same way about soccer. I want to go and drink and yell. I want to experience that sport the way that a lot of people experience the sports that I love but agonize over. I would like to just go and go, they won, they lost. I might even say we won, we lost today. That's how casual I want to be with my being a fan. And yeah, I guess I would say like I would like erase that because that's not the reason the Sonics left. The city will support the Sonics. Hockey, we don't have a culture of playing hockey is incredibly expensive in the United States. It's expensive in Canada also, but there are places where what's that?
Exchange rate. It's not as expensive.
Yeah, that's right. But it's culturally part of Canada. So there's more infrastructure for it. There's more leagues. Here it's like special traveling teams, and there's not that many ice rinks. Like there's a lot, it's to play. You got to be really intentional to play hockey in the United States. So I think none of us grew up playing hockey. So none of us grew up. I mean, and that's especially in the Northwest.
I would even like to bring this back to basketball. I mean, Seattle is really a basketball city first. It was our first major professional team were the Sonics. They were here before the Seahawks. They were here before the Mariners. This town is about basketball. I mean, just think about the weather that we have here most of the time. It's conducive to indoor sports. It's constantly raining and gloomy. So of course it's about basketball, right? Like, and if you go around this city, when the Sonics were here, or even now, there's basketball courts everywhere. Basketball is easy to play. There's just the availability of basketball is easy. All you need is a ball and a hoop, and every school seemingly has a hoop at least, right?
Absolutely.
So you can always play basketball, and this town was all about it. And when the team comes back, it's going to be so, even for the people that weren't here when the Sonics left or too young to remember when they left, it's going to be easy to embrace the Sonics upon their return because of the availability of basketball. I mean, even still, you go to a YMCA on a Saturday morning, there are a ton of kids and a ton of parents in there watching youth basketball. It's in a way, it's kind of like soccer, where it's probably the next most easy sport for parents and kids to access together, right? Is basketball, because it's a little bit more affordable. It doesn't require a ton of equipment like some of these other sports, and you can always find a league to play in. So whenever they do come back, it's one of those teams that'll be immediately embraced. And the likelihood, especially if they win early on, the likelihood of them kind of resuming their position atop the pecking order of sports franchises in this town, that's very possible. I think it's possible, and it could happen within the first decade as long as they don't, completely suck. So it'll be fun to watch. I mean, especially for those people that are new to Seattle or just haven't seen it before. But like, this town is basketball crazy. It's just been kind of hiding after the Sonics left.
Yeah. So, okay, we got to get to the topic du jour, the topic of the week, which is not what du jour means. It's and then we got to play. We're going to try to play the home run game. I want to talk about it. So first off, I'm going to briefly hit on the translator in the Shohei Ohtani. He's going to court. Like it's like, if you really believe that Shohei Ohtani was involved in this, which I have a suspicion. The big, like,
I mean,
The big deciding factor of whether it was or not is like, is this guy going to face charges? Well, the fucking rubber's meeting the road. This dude is going to face decades in prison potentially,
up to 33 years in prison.
Right, it's if that's what he's facing, I bet he starts getting real cooperative if he actually.
Well, he took a plea deal, which is why he pled guilty to all the charges, or a handful of the charges levied against him.
Right.
The plea deal basically says, of course, he faces up to 33 years in prison, but because he's pleading guilty, prosecutors are going to recommend a much lighter sentence for him, whatever that amounts to. Who knows?
But the part of the plea deal is not, we just want to get this over with. It's he cooperated.
Right. Yeah, he cooperated. He's not taking this thing to trial, so that's going to save everybody a lot of time and money. And as a result, they're going to recommend a lighter sentence for him. But he still is going to face multiple years in jail, you would have to think. 33 years seems ridiculous. Like, I get it. This guy took a lot of Shohei Ohtani's money. He impersonated Shohei Ohtani. He committed financial crimes, which, man, no one hates financial crimes like America. It's like, you can't put, like, 33 years seems ridiculous. 33 years is like manslaughter or second-degree murder, right? Like 33 years, you shouldn't put this guy in prison for as long as a murderer just because he took Shohei Ohtani's money and then had a gambling addiction on top of it. It seems ridiculous, but that's America for you.
He took a rich guy's money. I basically agree with you. Let's move on to the Tom Brady roast, because it should have been. So this could have been a whole episode, I think.
Now did you finish the wedged roast? Into 15 to 20 minutes. This morning I told you I was about 2/3 of the way through the roast, which I watched the other day, the first 2/3, found it hilarious. I am still 2/3 of the way through the roast. I did not watch it today. So I don't know what happens at the end, but I feel like I've probably caught the best roasters, because I do feel like this was front loaded. No, you think the back was better, huh?
So, I mean, I definitely think there were people who were very good at the beginning. Nikki Glazer's getting a lot of praise that's absolutely deserved. Very funny comic, by the way. Yeah. Did you see Andrew Schultz? You probably didn't. I think I did not get to,
I think I just wrapped up with Edelman. So Belichick and then Edelman. I did not get to Schultz, unfortunately.
Okay, so I think that, did you see Tony Hinchcliffe?
No.
Okay. So these are the two best of the day.
Okay.
Of the show. Were those two. Sam J, did you see Sam J?
I did see Sam J, yes.
Okay, so there's a couple things. I'll just go through everybody. First off, Drew Bledsoe, so brave to do it. I've now seen enough stuff about Jeff Ross making a happy ending joke and Tom Brady approaching him I've flipped my opinion. I originally thought it was part of the show. They were both joking. Since hearing a bunch of the comics, who will not shut up about it, by the way, if you put comics on the show, they're going to tell the dirty shit behind the. I think Tom Brady was legit telling Jeff Ross to stop. I think that was a condition of Robert Kraft setting up that close and being a subject of the roasts. I actually don't find that super interesting one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, if these were predetermined terms that were agreed upon prior to the show, breaching those terms it's a little shady, but at the same time, I understand it's an easy joke. You got to make the joke. And you hope that the person, the recipient, the butt of that joke is kind of like okay with it, understanding that it's a funny subject, right?
Yeah. So first off, before we even get into the rest of the people, the fact that Tom Brady agreed to do this is crazy to me, because they did not hold back outside of, I did hear Nikki Glazer say that they individually chose not to
go after the
kids, which I respect. That's actually, I've done a bunch of roasts. The only thing I ask is, like, please don't say anything about my wife or my kids. They're not comedians. They didn't sign up for this. You're welcome to, there's nothing about me that is off limits personally.
Right.
Other people do have limits. I've done roasts with comedians who've experienced like spousal suicide or eating disorders or something like that. And I understand people can be sensitive about stuff. The rules that were agreed upon, I think, is what they should have followed. But I'm not going to get passionate about that. I also think it was incredible for comedy. This was comedy, like, I think comedy that we've all been pretending we don't like, or at least like the quote unquote industry has been pretending it doesn't like. Yeah. And I'll tell you, like, every time a platform tries to stop people from seeing the comedy that they want to see, which is this type of comedy, it's Andrew Schultz, it's Sam J going harsh after Tom Segura and more harsh after Burt Kreischer. So harsh after Burt Kreischer, in fact. By the way, I'll say this. That was the most disappointing roast of the whole night, was those two
Segura
guys.
And Kreischer, yeah. They did
They
a
looked
bit.
like Joe Biden trying to read a teleprompter. Like, it was so bad.
I heard about it being bad before I watched the roasts. Obviously, there's a couple of things working against Segura and Kreischer. They're not really roast comics. They're kind of more like long form joke tellers in my experience.
Fine.
But even still, like you come into a roast, you know what you're getting. You're getting quick hitters. That's kind of the whole point of a roast.
They have a writing team behind them.
Yeah, but I understood what Segura and Kreischer were trying to do. They were trying to do a kind of a goofy, awkward bit, and they were playing up the goofy, awkward part of it, and it didn't land with everybody, but I found it okay. Overall, going back to some of the things you said, I do, my main takeaway is you're right. This was very good for comedy. I think it was Jeff Ross, or it might have been Kevin Hart as the host early on. Somebody early on pointed out, like, they haven't done a roast like this in a long time. The Comedy Central roast used to be like, it seemed like they did one a month, basically.
Yeah.
There were and I used to watch a lot of those because the thing that most people might not realize about a roast, it has really nothing to do with the person who's being roasted. It's just a vehicle for a lot of jokes. It's a vehicle for the comedians to just unleash on some scripted topics that make it a little bit easier for them, right? Like, you know, rather than having to come up with all new material and create your own special, you just have some guided topics that you can make jokes about. Because the thing about a good comic is they can make jokes about anything. You just have to give them the direction and tell them which jokes to make. You know, that's pretty much it. And so Tom Brady, you're right. It's crazy that he did this. I'm sure Netflix offered him an insane amount of money to be there, and that was probably attractive enough to him in his post-football life where he no longer has those $40 million a year contracts to be like, yeah, sure, I'll do this, you know. And I'm sure Tom Brady's not an idiot. Like, he knows what he was getting into to some degree.
Yeah,
but he probably
I commend him. I think it was right. Incredible. It was like it was so risky for him to do, and I think it's obviously like a cultural touchstone. It's like a huge. This is like immediately, it's a landmark in comedy. It's a landmark in sports. It's a landmark in live streaming shows versus cable. I mean, in every way, it
brings together two audiences that don't necessarily cross paths a lot. Like, I don't feel like diehard sports fans, you know, fans of Tom Brady necessarily are probably huge fans of like Jeff Ross or Nikki Glazer. Sure. So to be able to kind of bring those two groups together and hear some of those jokes that they've probably never, a lot of people who watch that have probably never heard jokes like that before. Jeff Ross and Nikki Glazer are like staples of the roast scene. You know, anytime there was a Comedy Central roast, those two were standouts. They've always been good. Jeff Ross has been doing roast like his whole life. That's his shtick. And you knew those two were going to be good. Going back to Bledsoe, what shocked me about Bledsoe, and you knew he had to be, I think Kevin Hart joked that he was the last person added to the roast. He probably was, just based on the position that they put him in. They put him between Jeff Ross and Nikki Glazer, arguably the two best comic roasters up there. They put Drew Bledsoe between them, which is like a thankless task. Didn't matter who you put between those two.
So what they call that is they call it a shit sandwich in comedy, because it's either he's going to be good, or if he's bad, we're going to be onto something new immediately after.
Right. And he was pretty good.
Yeah.
I was kind of surprised. Like, he wasn't the best of all the guys, the non-comics who roasted Brady. I don't think Drew Bledsoe was the best, but he was good enough that you forgot that he was sandwiched between the two best people up there. And that was impressive to me. I mean, I was just as a whole, all the people I saw, the non-comics who went, were pretty damn good. I was kind of shocked by how good they were. And I guess maybe it shouldn't surprise us that much, because for those of us like you and I who grew up in sports, who grew up around athletes, all you do is like make fun of each other all the time in sports. That's all you do.
And I want to make it abundantly clear again. There's a team of writers giving those people jokes. That Rob Gronkowski literally pointed out at one point. He's like, I actually wrote that one, because Drew Bledsoe had a team of people writing for him. Not only, by the way, like he had his family writing jokes for him, but also like they have people there to. I think like
I hear you, but I guess the thing that the caveat I would add is that regardless of the script you're given, you have to be able to deliver it. Like,
for sure.
by
Well, they also
contrast,
can
you saw how,
reject jokes. The interesting thing about a roast like this is all these people are rich, so that they don't need the paycheck. They could just
yeah,
leave. They could just not
yeah.
do it, right? So that
Well,
to have the awareness as Drew Bledsoe to pick the jokes that actually are funny, I think is
yeah. I mean, you
impressive.
saw how bad Kim Kardashian did, right? Like,
Yeah,
she's got the same team of writers behind her, presumably, but her delivery was so bad that it couldn't save her, right? And some of these other guys, their delivery was good enough. I mean, their stage presence and their delivery was good enough that they could get those jokes to hit.
Kim Kardashian's involvement in the show felt like a cop-out to me. Like, she didn't want to be on the dais because she didn't want to get made fun of a bunch, but she wanted to come up and do this kind of like wishy-washy milk toast that was like, who cares? Weird. And a bunch of generic roast jokes. She added nothing. I mean, I thought Bert and Tom took away from it, frankly. Sam J shitting on Bert was awesome. The Ron Burgundy thing, I'm so done with Ron Burgundy showing up. Did you get to that?
It was weird. Yeah, it was weird. I heard a lot of
I thought some of the jokes were funny, but I'm like, what? Do we still are doing this guy? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, I agree. Like, I actually, that was another one where I heard it was bad before I watched. And so my expectations were so low that all it was going to do was probably exceed the expectations.
Sure.
Because I agree with you. Some of the jokes that Will Ferrell told as Ron Burgundy were actually pretty funny. But I agree. It's a dated shtick. Like, that's a 20-year-old movie.
Yeah.
It's a 20-year-old movie. There are people out there, there are probably comics out there that don't even really know that movie the way that a lot of us do. And they don't really give a shit about Ron Burgundy as a character. And also, like, Will Ferrell himself is a comic. So, like, why can't Will Ferrell just come up there as himself? Like, why does he have to come up there as this character that people are past? Now, maybe it was, you know,
he's not a stand-up, for the record, which is, I think this is like perfectly suited for stand-ups.
No, I totally agree. And maybe he's more comfortable doing it that way. Or maybe Tom Brady said, you know, my favorite comedy movie of all time is Anchorman. And that's what, like, you know, caused this to happen. Like, I think for the target market of the football players that were there, that were supporting Brady, like, when you could see their reactions when Burgundy came out, when Ferrell came out as Burgundy, and they were all loving it. Like, it landed with that particular group. So there might be some more like inside knowledge there that we don't know about that like made this possible.
So you got to watch Tony Hinchcliffe, who's like by the way, like, I think some of this roast stuff can be kind of toxic. His like, and not great. I thought he had an incredible set. Andrew Schultz had a great set. I also, one of my friends wrote for Andrew Schultz. It's pretty cool. Also, Alex Guerrero was taking shots the whole night. And every time Alex Guerrero could not have more perfectly handled being roasted multiple times. Every time they showed a picture of him or a video of him post getting roasted, he was laughing his ass off. Like, Alex Guerrero is an unsung hero of that night because he got shat on a bunch and was a great sport.
I would say in general, most of the guys there were pretty good sports. I mean, you think back to that video of Norm Macdonald at the ESPYs 25 years ago now or whatever it was. And every time Norm was like amazing jokes. Like, I'm sure most people have probably seen that monologue by now, but every time they would pan to the crowd, all the athletes would like not know how to react to the jokes. Right? They either looked like they were either terrified because he was joking about them, or they were pissed. Like, they didn't react the way that you would expect somebody to react to comedy. And this group at the Brady Roast did a pretty good job of like playing along, being good sports.
Well, part of the deal is it was part of the Netflix is a Joke festival, and a huge chunk of who was in the audience were specifically comedy fans and comedians. Like, so it was a better crowd for that event than the ESPYs is for a bunch of great Norm Macdonald jokes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they definitely played up the crowd well. And so go ahead.
I want to get to some parts that you didn't see, but everyone else in the entire world has seen them. Belichick was incredible. I don't know if you saw Belichick yet.
Yeah, he was really good. Yeah.
And actually, I heard Gronk was going to be really bad, and I thought it was pretty good. I watched it a day late. And then Robert Kraft went up, and he did like kind of a like a sincere, like maybe one joke.
He didn't understand what a roast was.
I mean, I think he got it, but he's also like, this is a different guy. This is a businessman. He's not an entertainer. He's not an athlete. Like, also, nobody really wants to hear the billionaire shit on his employees and former employees. That being said, there was this really like stilted thing where Kevin Hart, who, by the way, Kevin Hart has a history of getting drunk and just like taking over events, like when he tried to get on stage at the Philly Super Bowl win. Which is fine. It's a charming thing about him. I would say Kevin Hart, maybe like, can we don't need to compliment someone with the same compliment 4 times between each roast set. Let's just move on to the next person. But he did this thing where he got Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft to take a shot together. And it was like so obvious that Bill Belichick did not want to do it. And then Kevin Hart's like, I did it. A black man got these 2 guys. And I was like, oh, dude, these guys do not feel the same unity as you think they do in your adrenalized stupor, maybe alcohol-induced adrenalized stupor. And then Brady went up, and like, it's always tough because you go up and like there's like not a lot of bone or meat left on the bone. All the jokes have been made about Bert Kreischer and Nikki Glazer. I will say this, and so I don't really want to like hyperanalyze. I thought it was he did a great thing for comedy. Tom Brady did a great thing for comedy to allow this to happen.
American hero, Tom.
I hope that more people do it. Peyton Manning, by the way, shows up. He was great. Belichick was like a surprise. Peyton Manning was also very funny. My favorite joke of the night, I think, was from a non-comic, was Julian Edelman came up and he goes, Kevin, a lot of people are going to make short jokes, but I'm going to make black jokes, which is an athlete is like all those guys are taking a bigger risk. The comics, they're only getting exposure. They're only getting exposed to fans who are going to like them more. Like every one of those people had a probably 100% career boost, except for the people who were already huge. Bert Kreischer, Tom Segura, Nikki Glazer is actually pretty big also, by the way.
Yeah.
Those athletes were taking a risk, and Julian Edelman said, I'm going to make black jokes. When I came in, or he goes, Kevin Hart is so black that when I saw him, I thought he was Bert Kreischer's liver. And then what did he say? He goes, when I saw Bert Kreischer's liver, I thought he must have just done 4 hours on Shannon Sharp's podcast or something like that, which to me was like, and I will say this, his delivery much better than mine in this moment. He's very funny. Julian Edelman's very funny. That was a great, probably also obviously written by someone else joke, but what a great joke. What a risk for him to take. What a fun.
I guess that was the takeaway for me too, is that the non-comics, whether they were being fed these risky jokes or not, they still made them, you know.
I will say, like, it didn't feel like anyone pulled any punches, which is like what you want in a roast. So we got to figure out a way to roast Ryan Divish. I think we got to get, I wish that we could get stuff like that locally, because I do think it would be fun. But I think those guys also have such little to gain, where like Tom Brady made $1 million or $100 million, I bet, off of that. And anyway.
Okay, we got to do a home run game.
Let's do a home run game. I got to go pick up some children. You go first this time. Okay. You pick your player first, because I gotta decide on one.
Okay, I got a guy today for you that I would say he's another. Last week I gave you Joey Votto, who I called. I think I called him a recent retiree, even though he's not retired.
Sure.
But this truly is a recent retiree, only a few years removed from playing. Kind of a guy who had a weird start to his career. He kind of sucked for a while, but then really flourished in Toronto.
I might literally be thinking of the same person.
I'm giving you Joey Bats. Jose Bautista.
That is genuinely who I was literally.
Well, don't do it, because I'm giving it to you.
So
don't
I didn't
look
pull
him
up his page.
Okay.
I was very close. I was literally had his baseball reference page. Man, so I want to say, I know he, prior to Toronto, I want to say Jose Bautista was in. That's so crazy that we had the same guy. He's like a perfect guy for this game, because his career is like tough to gauge. He had a lot of power for portions of it.
Yeah, and you basically know. I mean, you were cognizant of his entire career, start to finish. So
yeah, so I think he plays a big chunk of his career with the Pirates. His best years, I believe, are in Toronto. And then I'm like, it's real hazy on either side of that. Also, like, real late bloomer. I think hits his peak productivity in like his late 20s. Fuck, that's a good one. I'm gonna say he played 13 seasons. That's my guess. I'd bet he had a full slate of plate appearances in about 8 of those seasons. And in those 8 seasons, probably averaged like something like 30 to 35 home runs. So we'll start him at, but that puts him at like, what is that, 240? So, and then some real stinkers on either end. I'm going 325 home runs.
That's really good. That is after you said 240, I thought, wow, I'm gonna run away with this one, but you brought it back with what'd you say, 325?
Yeah.
Okay, it's pretty good. You were close. He played technically 15 years, but he really,
Hey, wait, let me give a little information to the folks, to the people, the listeners.
All right.
I did the calculations. This season, Alex has been off by 115 home runs combined, and I have been off by 112 home runs combined. And there's a thing in analytics in baseball that people used to talk about is, that the season has stabilized when Mike Trout leads the league and wins above replacement. So we know that the season has stabilized when Alex takes the lead probably for the last time in this game and carries it through to the end.
Well, it's going to be tough today because you were close.
Okay.
But yeah, he played 15 years. Yeah, I mean, only his memorable years were all in Toronto. I mean, the last year of his career is split between 3 teams, for God's sake. It's 2018, he plays for Atlanta, the New York Mets, and the Phillies. And none of it is remarkable. Prior to being in Toronto, he plays for Baltimore, Tampa, Kansas City, and Pittsburgh. He has 4 seasons in Pittsburgh, so that's kind of where he really gains his footing. But the first 2 years of his career, 2004 and 2005, he gets cups of coffee with these various teams, never even hits a home run in those first 2 seasons. So basically does play about 13 seasons as a result of that. His 162 game average for home runs is 31. So you were basically right on there. 31 per year is kind of what he averages. In 2010, his breakout season. So his first year, it's actually his 3rd year in Toronto at that point, but really his first year that he becomes a regular player and an all-star. 54 home runs in that first year. That's quite a few. Next year he has 43. Those actually both lead the league, I believe, in those 2 seasons. And then from there, he kind of regresses a little bit. He kind of pops again in 2015 with a 40 home run year. But even in there where he's only hitting 27, 28, 35 home runs, like at this point, he's elevated his image to a point where he's an all-star in all of those seasons. So Toronto, he obviously thrives. He ends up with 344 home runs.
Dang, that's pretty good.
19 off. Pretty solid. Yeah, it's going to be tough to beat.
Wow, I feel pretty good about that. The process works, as we've said many times. The process does work. Okay, mine is, I would say the other, like, good offensive catcher from the 90s and 2000s. There was, obviously, we all know Pudge Rodriguez, or people who are old enough know Pudge Rodriguez, and he was an incredible hitting, steroid-laden catcher for the Rangers is my biggest memory of him. There was another guy that was just kind of around that was like the people's catcher, I would say, Charles Johnson.
Oh, wow. I thought you were going to say the other offensive catcher, so you were going to give me Piazza, which I think we've
done.
Yeah,
I guess that is true. Piazza's actually, I almost don't consider Piazza a catcher because he was so bad at playing catcher.
Yeah, no, okay. But Charles Johnson, I did not expect. Okay, yeah, Charles Johnson, he comes up in like 94, 95 with the Marlins. He was a big prospect. I mean, people thought Charles Johnson was going to be even better than he was. If memory serves, he plays in Florida for a couple years. I think he's on their World Series team in 97. I think he ultimately goes to the Mets and probably bounces around to some other teams I'm forgetting after that. I think if I remember correctly, his career kind of gets abbreviated. It's like he either gets injured a lot or like it never really panned out the way people thought it would when he was in Florida. Like when he was in Florida, people thought he was going to be right there with Piazza and Pudge Rodriguez. And then, as time goes by, he kind of becomes more like a Todd Hundley, where you're like, okay, he's like that next tier down of catcher, pretty solid. A guy you can count on most days, but certainly not elite. I don't think I really have a cloudy memory of the end of his career, and I really only remember the start in the 90s. So I'm kind of shooting in the dark here, but I'm gonna say maybe he plays about the equivalent of like 10 full seasons because he's a catcher. Maybe not even that much. His catchers just don't get a ton of at bats because of all the off days. And I don't think he's a huge home run guy. Like maybe averages 18 a year, let's say, for 10 years. So that'd be like 180. And I don't even know. I mean, the 90s are so convoluted with guys like that. Like, he probably had like a 30 home run year in there that like nobody remembers because everyone else was hitting 60 on roids, So he's, in today's world, 30 home runs from a catcher, that's a big freaking deal. But back then it was nothing. So I'll say I'm gonna go with 155.
Alex.
Bad.
The precision with which you've taken the lead. I want you to know that. That's how close you are as you've taken the lead.
Wow. Unbelievable. Okay. I did not expect that.
What you said 155?
155, yeah.
So Charles Johnson starts his career in Florida, like you said. He plays on the 97 World Series team. He actually, I will say, I expected his career to be a little more riddled with injuries. He played, 94, he comes up and plays 4 games. 95, he plays 97 games, which is his, real rookie year.
Sure.
96, so this is the next 6 years in games. 120, 124, 133, 135, 128, 128, which doesn't, if you're not a baseball savvy person, doesn't sound like full seasons, but that's about a full season for a catcher. Yeah. 83 in his return to Florida, or no, not his return. 83 in 2002. He came back to Florida. I don't believe he ever played for the Mets, by the way, which is, I get, in my mind, he was a Met at some point. He went to the Dodgers, and I remember him going to Baltimore being a big deal. My bet is we got probably a trade to the Dodgers and then a signed with Baltimore, plays parts of 2 seasons in Baltimore, ends up with the White Sox, back in Florida, Colorado, Tampa Bay.
He really did bounce around there at the end. Yeah. Forgettable teams, forgettable seasons.
So his 162 game average is 23 home runs, but as we know, that's not really a full season for catchers. And I think if you were to make it his 125 game average, which is a more realistic full season, it's probably 18 home runs. I think you're very close. Charles Johnson, 167 home runs.
Woo, 12.
Pretty good.
Okay.
Pretty good. At first, I thought you were going to go too low. Then I thought you were going to go too high. And then you ended up somehow, some way through the process back in the middle where you were pretty close to being right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember anything after the Florida years, really. I mean, I forgot where he went after that. So it was just like, he was a good catcher, but there were so many good catchers in that era that he became overlooked. He was overshadowed by some other big names for sure.
95 through 98, 4 straight Gold Gloves, 7th in the Rookie of the Year voting. 97, he's 11th in MVP voting, and then makes only 2 All-Star games. With all that in mind, makes only 2 All-Star games, including a random All-Star game in 2001 when he had a pretty good season back in Florida. All right. That's the podcast. If you're still listening, which probably very few of you are, go come see me at that's a great promo. Black Raven Brewing in Woodinville, the Woodinville location. I'll be headlining a show there. May 18th, we have a show at Bickerson's Brew House. Ryan McComb, a buddy of mine who now lives in Nashville, is back in town, and he's going to headline that show. And then we're going to get dates for the rest of the year for Bickerson's Brew House, and I'm going to start announcing them on here. I might even throw my hat back in the ring to headline now that I'll have some new material, for the love of God, I hope. Casey McLean Comedy everywhere you do social media, except for Twitter, where I'm Casey McLean, or X. When are we converting to X? Are we going to start calling it X or Twitter forever?
No, probably Twitter forever. Yeah. And I'm Alex SSN. Thanks for joining.
Bye, everybody.